breaking news on WFLA Now. Here's Biunno.
An autopsy report that gives no answers, but rather drops massive questions into the death of Florida mother CASSIE CARLI, whose manner of death has not been ruled a homicide, and a cause of death that remains a mystery according to the county coroner's office. Hey there, folks. JB here with you live on WFLA Now. This is a developing story as we are learning about this from the St. Clair County Coroner's Office that has received the completed autopsy report on CASSIE CARLI. You can read about it right now by clicking on the link in the description on this video. If you don't want to hear it from me, if you want to read the very latest, you can do so on WFLA.com, the WFLA app, or one of our sister station websites as well. Just look for the link in the description on this video. But for now, we're going to break down the very latest with what we know. There was two big things with the completed autopsy report for CASSIE CARLI. And before I break those down, let me remind folks of the CASSIE CARLI story. CASSIE CARLI going missing in March of this year after a custody exchange of her 4-year-old daughter with her ex-boyfriend by the name of Marcus Spanavello. After the custody exchange, CASSIE CARLI went missing, launching a massive multi-state search effort from Florida into Alabama, and then, of course, crossing into Tennessee. We'll get into all this, I'm sure, in a little bit, but I'm sure a lot of our audience very familiar with the CASSIE CARLI story. CASSIE CARLI's body, her remains, were found in a shallow grave in a barn in St. Clair County, Alabama, and quickly arrested was Marcus Spanavello in Tennessee. And the charges were not related to her death, but rather tampering with evidence, even though we had a press conference from Sheriff Bob Johnson at the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office that pretty much indicated that they were highly confident that they had their man, that they had the person responsible for CASSIE CARLI's death. Then the wait began, and a very lengthy wait, approximately 6 months, waiting for the autopsy. The reason that Spanavello, as investigators would say, wasn't facing charges is because of the fact that they were waiting on the completed autopsy report out of Alabama. Remember now, Florida officials, they do not have control of the autopsy process. They're not involved in any way, shape, or form, of course, because of CASSIE CARLI's body and her remains being found in Alabama over state lines. So it took a lengthy 6 months for the completed autopsy report to be finalized. It has been finalized. I anticipate having the actual document in hand, but I spoke with the St. Clair County coroner this morning, and he indicated to me two significant things. First, that the cause of death is undetermined. The cause of death is how the person died, whether it was, and I'm just listing off some other common occurrences for an autopsy of this magnitude, something like a gunshot or a drowning or blunt force trauma, all the different ways, of course. And, folks that follow true crime, I'm sure, are very familiar with the different causes of death that comes along with somebody who is the victim of homicide. But I say victim of homicide, even more surprising, the county coroner telling me the manner of death, which is homicide, suicide, they determined that to be undetermined. So they could not, based on the remains that were found in St. Clair County, Alabama, they could not determine how CASSIE CARLI died, and they could not determine her manner of death, whether she was in fact murdered. These two massive unknowns throw a bigger unknown into this investigation, as Marcus Spanavello was supposed to have his trial on tampering charges begin this week in Sarasota County Court. But abruptly this morning, the judge in that case allowed a continuance for, of course, the trial to continue next week. So we do not know, and I've been trying to find out whether or not the continuance, the postponement of Marcus Spanavello's trial is in any way, shape, or form connected to, of course, the news that we have here regarding the completed autopsy report. But the completed autopsy report, I was told I was told today that it was completed last week and then, of course, sent out to the various departments and agencies that by law have to receive them for things to, of course, move forward. But I'm sure it was quite a surprise. I know that it was a surprise for a lot of folks following me on social media, a massive surprise when we're talking about the cause of death being undetermined and the manner of death especially. being undetermined. Joining me in our Zoom room, I'm going to see if I can bring him in. Stand by, Peter. And joining me here, everybody on stream, is Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know. Folks on YouTube, I'm sure, very familiar with Peter's work. Peter, good to see you. I haven't spoken to you in a while. How are you today?
What's up, man? I'm doing well.
I'm sure that you, perhaps like so many others, your eyebrows raise when you hear about the Cassie Carli story and of course, the ruling here in the autopsy that the cause of death and the manner of death are undetermined. Now, the Santa Rosa County District Attorney's Office, as we understand it, Peter, they were unable to proceed with charges against Spanavello related to Cassie Carli's death. They couldn't do that because they were waiting for the completed autopsy report. Before I start to ask you a lot of legal questions here, what do you make of this case, how you've been following it from here in Tampa Bay?
There's just so many unknowns with a case like this, and I see people, especially law enforcement, people speaking on their behalf, condemning her ex about not being cooperative and not speaking to police and not helping find his child's mother. Well, this is one of the reasons why, because when you have a situation like this where there's so many unknowns, most of the time criminal defense lawyers are going to advise that their client plead the fifth and not say anything, whether they're guilty or not. And I know a lot of people like to go in the news and say that that's an admission of guilt, but in reality, it's not, because it is the burden and the constitutional rights of the defendant to have the state have to prove their guilt. And you're seeing now in a case with so many unknowns why that burden is so high. A lot of the cases we see that go to trial, you see all the evidence that the state has, you see them presented, and it seems easy, but it's not that easy to gather the evidence to hold such a high burden. And in this case, especially without being able to determine a cause of death or even that it was a homicide, it would have been close to impossible. Maybe they shouldn't even legally or morally bring charges against him without this information. And that's what we learn when we find out about the results of the autopsy in a case with so many unknowns. This was one that would keep them from getting over such a high bar as beyond a reasonable doubt for him causing this death.
I have the quote here from an April 3rd press conference from Sheriff Bob Johnson. I'm going to read the quote, saying, "Spanavello was totally uncooperative. He never cooperated with us, and that goes a long way. It's your baby's mother, and she's missing, and you're not going to cooperate with authorities? That's kind of telltale. I think he's either going to spend the rest of his life in prison, or he's going to get the needle. Hopefully, the needle." End quote from Sheriff Bob Johnson, April 3rd, following the arrest of Marcus Spanavello. Peter, I would imagine it's relatively common. I mean, there were a lot of people asking questions as to why Spanavello was not charged in relation to Cassie Carli's death, facing, say, a murder charge. I would imagine that it's pretty standard practice to not be able to file those charges until you have a completed autopsy report. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's possible to still file charges at this point. But as we all know, prosecutors are supposed to seek justice, and they're supposed to seek a just outcome. They're not there just to get convictions and have high win rates. So I give kudos to prosecutors that wait for the evidence like this, and if there's not enough, they don't overcharge. They don't go after something that has got a lot of media attention, and maybe they still could convict him of murder even without a cause of death if a jury buys it and a jury convicts him. But that's why the first basically line of defense in our constitutional rights in the criminal justice system really is with law enforcement and the prosecuting attorneys making these charging decisions. They feel they have enough for the other crimes that they've charged him with. But while we don't know a lot, and this autopsy result has given us more unknowns, it has also answered some questions for us, right? We know that this cause of death was not a gunshot wound or blunt force trauma or strangulation or, drugging or something like that, to where an autopsy would reveal foul play and homicide and potentially murder, like we have seen in other cases that you cover on your show. Autopsy reports can tell us a lot with what they say and with what they don't say.
But when we have, here's my biggest question with this, Peter, because we have the manner of death, or excuse me, the cause of death being undetermined. Like you said, they weren't able to determine if it was a gunshot, strangulation, blunt force trauma. But the manner of death, where they categorize it as, say, homicide or suicide or accidental death. They couldn't even determine that Cassie Carli, center of your screen here, was a victim of homicide. So does that make it impossible, nearly impossible, for the Santa Rosa County District Attorney's Office to move forward with charges against Spanavello as it relates to Cassie Carli's death? Can they charge him with murder if her death is not ruled to be, in fact, from a homicide?
They can, but should they and will they? Probably not, and hopefully not. I mean, I don't think they should, unless obviously they have, a camera of him taking her into the barn where she was found or things like that. They could have some circumstantial evidence, but they really shouldn't in this type of a situation. But there's nothing barring it. There's nothing barring it. And if a defense attorney has this evidence, it would be up to the defense attorney to present how they can't actually prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it even was a homicide. And those types of arguments have been made at trial before. So this wouldn't be the first time that there are cases where you don't find a body. If you don't find a body, you don't have a cause of death. You can't prove it's a homicide without a body. And usually they don't charge cases like that, but sometimes they do. And it's much more difficult in those situations or in this situation.
Spanavello, here on the center of your screen, folks, has been in the Santa Rosa County Jail. Sheriff Bob Johnson said that when he was initially approached to comment or to cooperate with investigators, that he uttered one word, and that word was lawyer, and that he repeated that word waiting for representation. He has said to have been, of course, maintaining his innocence throughout this process. And again, the trial was supposed to start this week. We had it on our calendar for jury selection beginning today. The actual trial expected to begin the following day, so that would have been October 11th. And then we get the abrupt word this morning, Peter, that the trial has been continued to next week, postponed an additional 7 days. That's when I started getting on the phone and making phone calls. I thought that was a little bit peculiar, even though, continuations are relatively common, of course. But do you think that the two are connected as far as, or do you think there's a likelihood that the two are connected as far as Spanavello's trial being delayed a week, and then also as well, of course, the news of the autopsy report being completed?
Yeah, I mean, it's total speculation, but I would think they are connected. At the very least, just off the top of my head, thinking if you defend a defendant in a case like this and you get this information, I think it's important to put it in front of the jury so that they're not convicting him of murder, even though he's not charged with murder, if you get what I'm saying.
Yep.
Because the charges all surround this. And so sometimes when you have really heavy outcomes that even if he's not charged with that, the jury is more likely to convict him of these lesser charges. This evidence could be useful to the defense in saying that, look, they're not even saying this was a homicide. They have no cause of death that would point the finger at this defendant. And therefore, maybe he's not involved in, the destruction of evidence and misleading law enforcement and all the other kind of ancillary crimes that he's charged with, because this is the big ticket. This is what the outrage is about, is not that he didn't cooperate with law enforcement. It's that her life was taken. And that's what the uproar is about.
As a reminder, and Peter just noted it, that Spanavello is not charged with Cassie Carli's death, but he is charged with tampering with evidence, obstructing a criminal investigation. And if I remember correctly, this is a result of Spanavello allegedly taking Cassie Carli's phone and throwing it out of the window of his pickup truck, which of course is something that, look, why are you doing that to your child's mother? That, of course, raised a lot of suspicion within the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office, according to Sheriff Bob Johnson. Let me cite this report from the ABC station in Pensacola. That's WEAR TV, and they reported last week that attorneys representing Spanavello filed a request to the courts to limit testimony, and the filing argues that the state, I'm reading this here, argues that the state should not be allowed to have any witnesses testify in relation to allegations of kidnapping, murder, and manslaughter, which is basically them saying, look, if we're talking about tampering with evidence and obstructing a criminal investigation, we want the conversation in court, we want the testimony and evidence presented to be on topic, not off topic and stray to, again, the unknown of Cassie Carli's death. Not surprising to you, Peter, right, as far as that tactic?
Not just that, but trying to keep a case like this relevant and the evidence presented to the jury relevant can be really difficult when so many people know what's going on. And when you're talking about tampering with evidence or obstructing an investigation, I would try to be creative as the defense lawyer and try to get the judge to allow us to even say to the jury, this investigation did not result in a homicide. So you are not supposed to make your decisions wondering if this investigation that he's accused of tampering with evidence with or obstructing justice on, it did not result in a homicide, because a jury is going to think like, JB, you steal a stick of gum and if I throw away the pack, okay, are they going to really crush me on tampering with evidence on a crime like that? But if you kill somebody and I take and get rid of the gun, that's much more serious. So
right.
I think the result of the crime and the evidence that was tampered with and the investigation that was obstructed, it does make a difference in the jury's mind. And so I would try to find a way to make sure that we are not prejudicing this defendant by saying that, this is, how she died or was murdered or homicide, especially if they don't have that evidence yet. And as a criminal defense lawyer, that would be a difficult thing to try to do. But if you're the prosecutor, you have enough to convict in a situation like this just on its face. So you do want to protect that conviction. You don't want to leave any room for appeal if you can. So you don't want to be throwing out words like murder or homicide or manslaughter or anything like that, because that's just a quick way to lose an appeal and have to do this all over again. So if you're not going to charge those crimes, which they're not, there's a reason that they're not, and you're going to charge with obstructing and tampering, focus on obstructing and tampering, get the convictions that justice requires for Mr. Spanavello, and move on. And if you get enough for homicide later, then you discuss it later. But as it sits right now, using those words at trial would not be something I think the prosecutors would even want to do.
Let's remind our audience that as we are joined here by Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, about 6 weeks ago, Cassie Carli's sister came on WFLA Now and had a conversation with myself and our audience, and talked about at great length how frustrated she was by the process in Alabama. Again, how the autopsy was performed relatively quickly, but then, of course, you have to wait on the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences to process laboratory results, a lot of that related to toxicology, which can take time. And with a backlog, potentially, of there being other cases, of course, they have to process cases linearly. They're going to get to that case whenever they do. And we were told, of course, to be on the lookout for a result in October, or September into October was really the timeline. So this lines up, of course, with what the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences told us. Now, the Carli family has expressed their frustration with the process in Alabama. And there are people in the comments section. We're going to get to your hashtag HeyJB, hashtag HeyPeter, questions and comments out of the Facebook Live, YouTube Live. I'm also live on TikTok as well, but pay attention to that comment section too. But we're going to take some questions. And the question that I'm seeing a lot is whether or not there could be a second autopsy performed, because people don't want there to be the result of undetermined. That of course, just means that there was not an answer. And people, Peter, as you know, on doing your program, people want answers. They don't want ambiguity. They don't want to be left in the dark. So they want there to be answers. We have this comment that comes in from Gassiena, hashtag HeyJB. Could the family of Cassie Carli ask for another option with regard to the autopsy? And I do know from covering other cases that the family can pursue the option of having the remains examined by a third party, go the private route rather than the public route. But Peter, I was told this morning, and this is something I had heard even previously as well as I was making a round of phone calls this morning, that Cassie Carli's remains have been cremated. So, and that was done soon after they got the remains back, after the autopsy was in fact completed. How much does that create potential difficulties as far as anybody out there who wants there to be another opinion of the remains in regards to the autopsy?
As you can imagine, that makes it very, very, very difficult, but not impossible. And I'll tell you a couple ways. And it's not just Cassie Carli's family that could want a second opinion, we'll call it. But Mr. Spanavello and his lawyers may want to do some kind of autopsy or expert work to determine that as well. The only way that it can really be done still now at this time, because in an autopsy, as gruesome as it sounds and as horrible as it is, they take a lot of pictures. They document what they find. They draft a report. There's a written report and there are pictures. So if another expert wants to go look at that, look at the pictures, see if they can determine anything by that, see if they can determine anything by the pictures, they can determine anything from the writing or the dictation from whoever performed the original autopsy. Sometimes they can come to a different answer. But if you remember back some of the high profile cases that have had autopsy reports, they're very in depth. And many times when there are successful homicide charges coming forward, the autopsy plays a big part in that. So without that coming from law enforcement, which, is supposed to be known as an unbiased party, because again, they're seeking justice, as opposed to somebody hired by the victim's family or hired by the defendant or his family, then, that's usually the one that holds the most weight. So if, let's say, Cassie's family does hire somebody and they come up with a result that it was a homicide by strangulation or some other reason, then the defendant could hire somebody. And if the defendant's autopsy agrees with the state's autopsy initially, that's going to hold a lot more weight, especially with the burden being beyond a reasonable doubt, than a private person hired by the victim's family. And the state would also have to feel that it is reliable evidence, because we can get really down into the legal weeds and, objecting to an expert's testimony or an expert's qualifications and things like that. But if the state already has an autopsy with this result, I think it is very difficult for this to be undone in some sort of way to get the answers that we all want.
The more opinions that you get on autopsy results, the more it muddles the waters, so to speak, correct? Because then you have conflicting testimony potentially, and that just makes it even more unclear when you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt when you're, of course, trying to prosecute your case, correct?
Virtually every criminal trial says the way the jury is supposed to weigh the evidence and things they can look at is the evidence, the lack of evidence, or the conflicts in the evidence. And that's exactly what you're describing. There would be conflicts in the evidence, especially major pieces of evidence like an autopsy report.
The real bubble girl here has been on screen for a minute. Hashtag KJB, Peter, and the lawyer with the evidence collected, DNA testing can be performed. DNA testing should be protocol on all cases like this. And of course, you have to imagine, look, DNA testing without question has been performed by the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. You would imagine that, as they do with all of their incoming cases, that they handle this and they do as thorough of a job as possible to, process for DNA, look for fingerprints, anything that they can collect from the crime scene or the scene of where the remains are found to determine, how a person passed away, how a person died. But let's get to, we're going to take some more questions and comments out of the Facebook Live and YouTube Live comment sections. We're here live with Peter Tragos, the lawyer. Peter, I'm always very cognizant of my guests' time, so you just tell me if you have some meeting or Zoom call to hop on. How much time do you got with us today?
I got probably another 15 minutes.
Terrific. So as we're here live with Peter, we'll try to answer as many questions out of the Facebook Live and YouTube Live comment section, also keeping an eye on TikTok here as well on the screen. Let's point out something. Cassie Carli's remains were found in a shallow grave in an Alabama barn. This is a barn that is believed to have been connected to Spanavello in some way. That's basically, as investigators, of course, were pursuing this case. That's where the investigation led them, was to St. Clair County, Alabama. They found this barn and they found this shallow grave. Cassie Carli did not bury herself. She's there in a shallow grave. That's where the remains are found. So people are going to ask, Peter, if she's found in a shallow grave, then how is it not homicide? But of course, there are other alternatives that could potentially exist, other than homicide, right? We're talking about even the potential of there being an accidental death, somebody doing something extremely tragic, and then of course it being perhaps an accident, and then of course trying to dispose of the remains. Is that right? If somebody's remains are found in a shallow grave, then what are the other alternatives rather than homicide?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of alternatives, but the one that you didn't mention also is it could have just been natural causes. And then let's say, if we want to speculate and just try to come up with plausible stories, she was with her ex, she has a panic attack or a heart attack or something, and he freaks out, buries her in a shallow grave and leaves and doesn't tell anybody because he knows everybody thinks it was him. Plausible explanation, potentially. Did that happen? Who knows? It could have been an intentional homicide that we don't know about yet, obviously. But there are ways to get into that situation. The interesting thought about it, though, is there's really no way for it to get there without any crime being committed, because the handling of the dead body, not reporting it, a lot of issues can come with that as well, depending on the jurisdiction and what you should do, what you shouldn't do. if you do see a dead body, different duties and different statutes that could be violated there. So there are other things that could be coming depending on what they find, but I'm not real optimistic based on the results that we're seeing. And the DNA questions before, in some cases, those can be huge. But in other cases, let's say she had Mr. Spanavello's DNA on her shirt, they were together. You know, they were exes. They passed their child back and forth. You know, if there was his DNA on her, it doesn't necessarily prove anything necessarily. Now, if the DNA from his hands were on her neck and there was evidence of strangulation, that obviously means more. It seems like we don't have that. So again, I just feel like there's a lot of unknowns here, but foul play seems to be part of the equation based on how she was found.
Again, Peter Tragos joining us here. Peter, let me ask you this question. If you are Spanavello, if you are Spanavello's attorney, and you hear this news of the autopsy report coming back and seeing undetermined next to manner of death and cause of death, your reaction, I would imagine, extraordinarily positive?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that murder charges are not coming. I would think that even potentially negligent homicide charges are not coming. And if they are, the plan would be to fight them, because I don't think there's enough there to prosecute and win this case beyond a reasonable doubt to hold that high verdict. That would be my thought, is they just don't have enough evidence at this point. Him throwing her phone out the window and being the last person to see her does not necessarily prove homicide.
As we mentioned Spanavello's pickup truck a short time ago, we'll go to Team Brittany here on YouTube Live, #KJB, #KPeter. We got a Facebook Live comment in the queue as well. If you use one of these hashtags, we can animate your comment on screen, bring you into the conversation, and discuss I think this is safe to say, this is a relatively surprising turn of events, given of course, Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office, their high confidence in Marcus Spanavello being the person that they have been looking for in relation to Cassie Carli's death. Team Brittany says, if they found evidence of a body having been in Marcus's truck or trailer, would this be a way of getting the conviction on circumstantial evidence if they found such evidence?
Potentially, and again, it could be mishandling a dead body or some statute that deals with those actions, but I definitely think it would be more than what they're indicating is there right now. And I do think the more evidence circumstantially that you stack, like they were together, her body was laying face down in the backseat of his car, because again, that would also be different if there's just her DNA in his car. Who's going to testify that they didn't just go for a ride together the night that they met up? So that there are some issues there with plausible explanations for a lot of this. And if it comes down to the end of the day and they're prosecuting him for homicide and they have proof that he buried her in this shallow grave in the barn, again, if he takes a stand and testifies that she had a heart attack or something happened and he freaked out and knew everybody was going to think it was him, still makes it difficult to convict him of an intentional homicide or even a negligent homicide if there really is no evidence that he did cause this. And that's the point, is that he caused it.
As far as the tampering with evidence charges, how well do these stick now, as far as this claim that Cassie Carli's phone was in Marcus Spanavello's possession and he, again, allegedly threw it out of his car window? As far as the big charges that the district attorney's office is looking for, and they're looking to prosecute him on a murder charge, that might potentially, of course, now be off the table as far as their strategy. As far as these tampering charges, were those originally intended, you think, to be tic-tac charges, add-on charges, just charges really to get him, behind bars, and that they were expecting there to be this big charge in the aftermath of the autopsy report coming out? I'm now asking about the tampering with evidence charge, the obstructing of justice charge. Where does that go from here now?
So a lot of times those charges will be used for, yes, keeping him behind bars. You said it is one of the main reasons. But also getting access to more evidence, getting more search warrants, having more legal authority to do things, and the defendant having less constitutional rights, where he is arrested and the presumption of guilt is high, assuming with the evidence that they presented, it can affect all of that. And if you see and you look at cases across the country like Darrell Brooks going on in Wisconsin right now, 77 charges is what's against him right now before a jury. So it's not usually just one charge. Many times they tack on these other charges. And again, it gives them more of a likelihood to at least win. And even if they lose the big one, they can still get jail time, still get a punishment for somebody that they believe has committed a heinous crime.
I have one more question for you, but we're going to go to Facebook Live for a moment to get this question on screen. It comes from Michelle. Hashtag HeyJB. If there are 2 autopsies done with 2 different findings, whose decision would be considered?
That would be an argument for the lawyers to make before the jury. And just about, I mean, I do a lot of personal injury cases, right? To where they can be a wrongful death case. And one person could say it was, this company's fault. And one can say it was natural causes. We present the 2 experts. We present the reports. We talk to the jury. We explain why the report that our expert presented is correct. And the jury has to decide that answer at the end of the day, who caused this death. And it's the same thing here. The state would put up what would be interesting is the defense would be putting up the state's autopsy report, which would give it more weight. Mm-hmm. And the state, in this case, I guess, would be putting up Cassie's family's doctor's autopsy report. So, to me, if I'm an unbiased juror, I would think the state's expert is probably the one that holds the most weight and has the most authority in this case. And if the defendant agrees with it, that's why the water gets really muddy if this was to happen.
We've got a lot of folks on social media, various groups that have been created. I've seen a bunch on Facebook, including one that I know regularly tries to post updates and tries to be, uplifting, calling for justice for Cassie Carli. We have the Carli family that has come here on WFLA Now, come on stream with me and said that Cassie, when she was alive, said to them, "If anything ever happens to me, Marcus did it." We also have Sheriff Bob Johnson, again, saying that he was so sure that Marcus Spanavello is the person responsible for Cassie Carli's death that, again, here is his quote, "I think he's either going to spend the rest of his life in prison or he's going to get the needle. Hopefully the needle." I mean, that's something that you normally don't hear sheriffs speak to that level, to that extreme, unless they are really sure that they have the right person. So you have the Carli family, Peter, highly confident, based on what Cassie had told them, that Marcus, here in the center of your screen, is responsible. You've got the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office saying that they are highly confident that they have the man responsible. But yet now we have this completed autopsy report that says that her manner of death and cause of death are both mysteries. They're both undetermined. So I'm going to give you the opportunity before I let you go here, Peter, to speak to, as far as justice for Cassie Carli. Justice in so many ways is intertwined with law and our legal system, as you know, being a lawyer. How does this proceed as far as the Justice for Cassie movement online?
This is where things feel so disappointing when you look at the outcome of horrible situations sometimes. And the justice of convicting Mr. Spanavello for murder still is not complete justice in bringing Cassie back or having her with her family, but it is a form of closure and justice if he's the one that committed these crimes. What's difficult in these situations is you don't necessarily know what the evidence is going to bear out at the beginning of a case. And when you can be extremely confident, especially, this is also an indication of how much we don't know being on the outside, as opposed to Cassie's family or even law enforcement that's doing the investigation, seeing plenty of evidence that we are not privy to and that may not even be admissible in court, but they are still seeing it and it is still painting a bigger picture for them. It's not usual for sheriffs to go so hard at a defendant like this sheriff is in this case. So I don't blame them. I don't think that they're wrong or blowing smoke or anything like that. I can totally understand where they're coming from. But I think that if you ask the sheriff, he would agree that constitutional rights are important. We have to do things the proper way and follow proper procedure. And unfortunately, sometimes stuff like this happens, which is crushing to a victim's family. And while it may not make them feel better in this individual case, hopefully there is some sort of a silver lining that at least there are charges that our judicial system allows in a case like this without evidence of him causing the murder or him causing the death, that will still make him pay for at least a part of his involvement. There are also maximums on these types of charges that can put him in prison for years. They can be run concurrently or consecutively as opposed to concurrently. So you can stack them on top of each other. So there's still some sort of justice to potentially be had, and it's not necessarily over. The craziest thing to me is the fact that the body's been cremated, and it will be very difficult to come up with any, because inconclusive is different than natural causes, like you said, or if they actually would have given a cause of death or a manner of death. They didn't give that. So inconclusive does leave open the door for that second autopsy, for another expert to look at it. But without the body, relying on pictures and relying on reports that came to a completely different conclusion, now you literally just have two different people looking at the same exact evidence coming up with two different conclusions.
Peter Tragos, the lawyer, folks, if you do not follow Peter on YouTube, you got to go follow him at Lawyer You Know. Of course, you might recognize him from the awesome work that he did breaking down Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Really, as far as being able to break down some complex legal arguments and break down complex legal topics, Peter is among the best I've come across on YouTube. Go give him a follow, folks. Again, at the Lawyer You Know. Peter, any final thoughts before we let you go? I
appreciate that, JB. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say people don't get discouraged with our justice system. We have rules to protect every citizen. We never want to think we would ever be capable of something or accused of something, but we would want those protections if we were accused of something. But justice is not always just done where we can see it and where we understand it. And this may not be over. So I think while this feels like a miss and like bad news, and it is, because we want answers, and the autopsy report we were hoping was going to provide the answers that could point us in the direction of who caused this, and either confirming Cassie's family or law enforcement suspicions that it was Mr. Spanavello or whoever it was, it would point us in that direction, and it hasn't. So I would say don't give up the faith yet. Let's see how this case progresses, how the investigation continues. If the trial goes forward, if those convictions come, at least it's a part or a step towards justice. So we'll keep following it and hopefully not be too discouraged, but it's hard not to see this as really kind of a kick to the gut when we were hoping we were going to get some answers from this report.
Peter Tragos. Peter, thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it. It helps me answer a lot of questions. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
All right. See you, everyone.
Yeah, take care. Again, back here with you live, folks, on WFLA Now. That was Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know. And what we're going to do here, folks, to our audience on Facebook Live, I know that we've got Eagle 8 HD that is going to be surveying some Hurricane Ian damage. We are monitoring and surveying the progress that is being done in Sarasota, Lee, Charlotte counties. So Eagle 8 HD, in fact, I will show it to you here live for a quick second if I can. This is Eagle 8 HD currently heading to that area. And so Facebook Live, that stream is probably coming up next. If you want to be part of a little bit more of a lengthy Q&A, we're probably going to be going till the top of the hour, focused on Cassie Carli, taking your questions, bringing up your comments, your observations, what you think of this pretty significant turn of events. You can join us on the WFLA YouTube page. You can also find me on TikTok. We're live right now on TikTok taking questions and comments as well on the WFLA JB TikTok page. That's relatively new for us here. So Facebook Live, we are going to be ending the stream here momentarily. And again, if you're looking for the very latest, it is on WFLA.com, the WFLA app. As again, the coroner telling me Cassie Carli's death was not ruled a homicide, and her cause of death also remains undetermined per the completed autopsy report out of Alabama. So back here with you live, and this is now live on WFLA.com, WFLANow.com, the WFLA app, and then our YouTube account and the WFLA JB TikTok page. Good afternoon to you folks. This is a pretty significant update, one that people were waiting months for. This is something that was brought up at one of the original press conferences as far as the autopsy process and how it relates to figuring out exactly how charges are going to be filed and who is responsible for Cassie Carli's death. By now, a lot of folks, I'm sure, have just assumed that it was Marcus Spanavello, that being the ex-boyfriend and the father of their 4-year-old daughter together, Cassie Carli and Marcus Spanavello, their 4-year-old daughter together. However, this latest report, of course, throws a lot of doubt, at least in the legal process. I've been trying to get a hold of the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office for comment. I have a couple of contacts over there. I have not heard back from them yet. As far as the Carli family, they're still processing this news. I know that they are aware of it. They're just still processing this. This is not what they were expecting. I think that's safe to say. And so there's a lot of, look, I think that people with this case thought that there was going to be a very, expected sequence of events, that the autopsy report was going to come back, that it was going to reveal a cause of death, that it was going to prove that it was homicide, that there was going to be evidence that pointed to the person who committed that crime. And then, of course, the charges were going to be filed against the sole person that has been pointed to for the crime for the last 6+ months, that being the man on the right side of your screen, Marcus Spanavello. However, it did not stack up that way. This, of course, this autopsy report just poses a lot of questions now. And the death of Cassie Carli is as big of a mystery as ever. How she died and who, if anyone, is responsible, again, for her death. So we're going to focus in here on, let's see if I can refresh TikTok Live. I don't think that there are too many people joining us on TikTok, though I will say hello to our TikTok audience and also say hello to our YouTube Live audience and try to take some questions and comments there over the next 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how long the newsroom has me stay on stream. Janice Peace at JB. Hey, JB. What about technology? Can the vehicle or the phone prove anything? Digital forensics is at the core now of just about every law enforcement agency in the country. And if it's a really small law enforcement agency, it's very common for law enforcement agencies to assist others that might be smaller as far as getting help with digital forensics. It's a very real thing. Tracking down where a phone might have been, the activity on that phone, where a vehicle might have been. A lot of vehicles now come with GPS locators on them. So look, by now, digital forensics has done their job, a thorough job. It was probably done, shortly thereafter, Cassie Carli going missing, trying to determine and use technology to our benefit to figure out what the situation was as far as her remains and, at first, remember, she was a missing person, so finding out where she was and then, of course, figuring out who was responsible for her death. Technology, I'm sure, has been, any technological evidence, I'm sure, has been gathered, and could they do a more deeper dive? I'm sure that's on the table, but you would imagine that digital forensics has been at least mostly exhausted at this stage in the investigation. Oh no, TikTok is apparently glitching. All right, sorry about that, TikTok. I thought it would work. TikTok has not been my friend as far as live streaming goes, but we're trying our very best here. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Yeah. Going to some other comments. And again, it's got to have hashtag HeyJB to bring it up here on screen. Temp1D or Temp1D, hashtag HeyJB. Where is the evidence and proof? Is saying someone did it proof? Asking for a friend. Yeah, look. The Carli family believes that Marcus did it. They said it even before Marcus was arrested. They believed that Marcus was responsible. They did that in an interview with me. And then, of course, you have Bob Johnson saying, that he hopes that Marcus Spanavello gets the needle. These are extraordinarily powerful and extreme allegations without much evidence. Where is the evidence that Marcus Spanavello is responsible for Cassie Carli's death? Now, I remember, and I'll pass this along, as far as the barn is a big variable in the equation. The barn is believed to have been connected to Spanavello in some way. When I was doing a lot of research on this story, it was explained to me about the barn and how the barn is significant, though that is something that really detectives and the sheriff, Bob Johnson, should explain more thoroughly rather than myself. But the barn is not a random barn. I think it's pretty safe to say. And so if the barn is evidence and proof, even if it is somehow connected to Marcus Spanavello in some way, again, you need evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to prove that this person should be prosecuted and convicted of something as serious as a murder charge. So that murder charge is less likely than ever before throughout this process. And where it goes from here, again, I'm trying to get a hold of people. I think that this news coming out is still being processed by various parties connected to this story. This was, in fact, we got word of this. We got word of this inadvertently because I was making phone calls. Look, this is what we do as far as the world of journalism, right? We make phone calls, we talk to people, we try to get information. And so I had heard, of course, first that the trial today for Marcus Spannabello had been continued until next week. And then I just started picking up the phone. I started contacting people, as many people as I could, before it led me back to the coroner's office in St. Clair County, Alabama, and they informed me that the autopsy report was in and that the manner of death and the cause of death were both undetermined. So I think this is still very new, and a lot of this news is still being processed, and that's probably why no one's responding to my calls as far as the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office, as far as other parties involved with this case, trying to get answers here for you folks. But I think that this is kind of a random and unexpected turn that at least people that were sure of Spannabello's guilt, I think those people are the most surprised by this particular turn of events. Dixie Down, #KJB, did they share the toxicology report? So I am awaiting on the actual document. So the St. Clair County coroner told me on the phone, he says he has the document, he's going to send it over my way. And then I called a second time. I said, hey, I really would like this document. I think it's really extraordinarily important. I know that you have told me that you are releasing to me, as I made it very clear, member of the media, and the cause of death undetermined, manner of death undetermined. And I'm just trying to get a hold of this record, this public record, of the completed autopsy report, again, done by the state of Alabama in conjunction with the St. Clair County Coroner's Office. And they said that first they said they were going to fax it my way. And then I said, I took a moment and I said, my goodness, I don't know our fax. We have a fax machine at the station, but it's been a long time. I have to go find the fax number. And they said, no, wait. We don't have to fax it. We will email it your way. And now I'm waiting for that email to come in. So to the great folks at the that are working as far as behind the scenes to get me this document, thank you for that. But we're still waiting for it coming in. I was a little bit taken aback by, again, I haven't used a fax machine. No, I used it once 4 years ago when I first got to WFLA, and I haven't used it since. So once in the last decade is how often I've used a fax machine. Look, history underfoot is right. And Peter noted this. #AJB, he can still be charged. What about cases when the body isn't found at all? They can still charge and get convictions. Yeah, but in this case, while you do have a body, you have a thorough examination of the remains and lab work pointing to it not, or at least, look, they're not saying that it isn't a homicide. They're just saying that they can't rule it as a homicide. And there's a big difference to say that it's not something. It's ruled undetermined, which is them saying, look, we can't rule it a homicide, but that's not us saying that it can't be a homicide. It's just saying that based on the evidence that they have collected, their examination of the remains, and everything that they have provided to them, they can't categorize the remains as being the result of a homicide. So they can still move forward with charges, but we heard from Peter there talking about, how you responsibly execute the law of this country and the law of Santa Rosa County, Florida. And look, this not having it ruled a manner of death as homicide makes this extraordinarily more difficult for them to file these charges with confidence and to have these charges lead to a conviction. So there's a lot of problems that I'm sure exist from a prosecution standpoint. And look, for Marcus Spannabello, he has been proclaiming his innocence, as we understand it. That's how it's been communicated to me, that he has been maintaining his innocence. There was a family member that appeared in court that also maintained his innocence. He is looking at this, I'm sure, and saying, look, I am innocent. This is the document that proves it. That's common sense, right? I'm sure that he is extraordinarily aware of this report existing, and it will be the number one thing that he and his legal team point to as far as attempting to clear his name from being involved with Cassie Carli's death. Tempe 1D, thank you. That's very kind. Stormy 7572 hashtag HeyJB. This is a good example of needing to wait for all evidence to be discovered and processed before anything can be sure. It's so very painful for the family when it's not helpful to the case. Here's what's interesting about this, Stormy, is that in a lot of large cases, right, in cases that get a lot of attention, and even the ones that don't, there's evidence that is known to the public, and then there's evidence that is unknown to the public. And the evidence in this case that is known to the public is scarce. It's really scarce. We don't have a lot to go by. But for Bob Johnson, sheriff, elected sheriff in Santa Rosa County, Florida, to say, basically, in effect, I think he deserves the needle, or I hope it's the needle. You have to, my mind, I'm sure your mind as well, the mind of any common sense person would think, my goodness, there has to be some evidence that they are not releasing to the public that they would be reserving for trial, that would point to it being so concrete that they know that they have the person responsible for this tragic death of a Florida mother, that he would go up there on the podium and say that. That is not something that a sheriff says lightly. So while I agree, Stormy, I agree with you 1,000,000%. Good example of needing to wait for all the evidence to come out. With the way that our legal system works in this country, most of the evidence in a case like this are usually those cards are left face down. You don't know what the evidence is because the public doesn't know. Investigators know, the district attorney's office knows, but we don't know. So it makes it extraordinarily difficult because these press conferences, you're trying to read tea leaves when you see a quote like that from a sheriff like Bob Johnson, where he sounds extraordinarily confident that the evidence that he has is going to lead to, Spanavello being convicted. But we as the public, we have no idea what that evidence is. And we're left to wonder and left to wait for the court, the case itself to hit a courtroom before we know. So we don't know what all the evidence is, I think is the big thing to take from your comment, Stormy, is that while we don't know what evidence exists, the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office might say, hey, look, we have X, Y, and Z that says otherwise. This is also very, very interesting as far as the dynamic between, we have an investigation in Florida that has been conducted. The lead investigative agency, the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office. Then we also have all of the forensic work being done in Alabama. And Alabama would be the one, I believe, to file charges. So there's because the body was, of course, found in Alabama. So there's a lot, too, of unknown as far as the dynamic and the relationship between Alabama and Florida and the conflicting sort of, the conflicting developments that we have here. We have the lead law enforcement agency saying this is the person who did it. And then we have Alabama and the Department of Forensic Sciences and the county coroner saying there's nothing that shows that. So there's a conflict there. And how that conflict plays out going forward is going to be significant. Lawrence says, hashtag KJB, didn't everything breathed into the lungs get examined? Many deaths result from objects preventing being able to breathe, from air getting to the lungs. Look, everything is examined in an autopsy like this. Everything is examined. So the answer to your question is, I am sure yes, but we are awaiting the document that says definitively. And look, I don't know if that document is a single page and more of a cover letter, or if it's the full autopsy results. This is, again, just coming out. This is just developing. And there is, if you remember from our stream from 6 weeks ago, there is a very specific procedure that has to be followed with the Department of Forensic Sciences releases their results. The coroner actually has the results, and then I believe the coroner has to give those results to the lead law enforcement agency in the case, and then, of course, it goes on from there. So this is all likely happening now, and that's why this is still a breaking and developing story, is because probably right now a lot of these conversations are going on as folks in Alabama and Florida process this news. We'll stay here with you live a little bit longer. Maybe another. Yeah, we're going to go live another 5 minutes, folks. I do know, Team Brittany, #AJB, was the cause of death undetermined or both? The cause of death and manner of death, if you know. Yeah, so I made this clear when I wrote the article on WFLA.com. The manner of death, which is the category of the death, which is usually homicide, accidental, suicide. Again, it can vary state to state, but that's usually how it works. The manner of death is undetermined. And I asked a lot of follow-up questions on the phone to make sure and just to confirm what I was reporting. Manner of death, undetermined. They could not say it was a homicide. Cause of death, undetermined. Which is, the cause of death is how the person died. Strangulation, gunshot, stab wound, blunt force trauma, so on and so forth. So both undetermined. And I'm sure people are frustrated thinking, my goodness, this has been a 6-month wait, all this time, all of that for undetermined. But perhaps that's also why we have undetermined, is because they were spending a lot of time trying to figure this out, and they couldn't. In the end, they couldn't. That's not a fact. That's just me wondering aloud. But Sean B, #AJB, has Marcus even been questioned by authorities after his arrest? Cassie Carli said if anything happens to her, it was Marcus. Yes, Sean, this is accurate. And as far as your question, again, he was said to be, quote unquote, uncooperative with deputies and investigators as after his arrest. And then the word that he kept repeating was lawyer. He wanted a lawyer. He got his lawyer. And now, of course, let me make this clear. Despite this news, this trial starts a week from today with jury selection. Now, I have been told that streaming is unlikely. Every court system in various counties, various states, they will. Yeah, I have to get going here in a moment. I'm just being told by our team I have to get off stream for something else. Unfortunately, folks. But I think we are going to be launching a new live stream across all platforms. But again, the case is the trial is still expected to happen next week. I want to make sure that's very clear. Okay, I see it. Over here, folks, in the WFLA Now Stream Center, we've got Eagle 8 HD in the air, and they're surveying some Hurricane Ian damage here in Southwest Florida, also in Central Florida. So I believe that our stream is going to be wrapping up here momentarily. I'll look for another couple of comments, but yeah, Marcus, just look. He said lawyer. And I believe that is going to do it for our stream. Dixie Down. Hold on, where are you? There it is. What are the charges? Tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, I believe, are the two charges, I believe. Yeah, and look, Tweety US News, #HTB. The word lawyer is a common response to being arrested. As you know, lawyer is not an indication of guilt. And Peter indicated as much. Yeah, but as I was saying, streaming is said to be unlikely. Now, look, I'm going to try to clarify that for our audience. I'll post updates on Twitter because I think that people want to follow this trial live. And I believe there's courtroom and media access, but that streaming might not be permitted. And we're trying to clarify that, because that's to me an oxymoron. Why would there be media? Why would you allow the media to cover the case, but you wouldn't allow live streaming to occur? That to me, either the case is open or the case isn't open. And I'm trying to figure out exactly why the trial would be closed off to live streaming, even though reporters could be present. That to me, so hopefully I'm going to get a hold of somebody. I have some calls in to the courts there in Santa Rosa County to find out. But I will post online on WFLA JB, Twitter, Facebook, all my platforms. I will post updates as to whether or not that trial next week. Again, if you're joining us now live, it's 3 o'clock on October 10th. We're talking about the 17th into the 18th, really, this getting underway next week in Santa Rosa County Court. I will post on my social media accounts what that looks like. Maybe we do live streams. If we can't stream it from inside the courtroom, what our audience can give me thumbs up. Maybe we could do, I'll post a video or even a live stream. We could do a live stream summing up the day's events. I don't know if that's helpful to people. Again, I'm here to do my very best for you. So let us know exactly if we can't live stream it, how you would like to see coverage presented to you across platforms on WFLA Now. Trying to do our very, very best. Folks, got to get going. Eagle 8 HD is coming up in a live stream. Not sure if that'll be on YouTube. That might be on Facebook and WFLA.com, the WFLA app as well. YouTube, I'm not so sure. I got to go talk with our team about our stream strategy here. But again, if you're just joining us and you want to read the very latest right now, it is on WFLA.com, the WFLA app. The Corner telling me that Cassie Carli's death has not been ruled a homicide. They say the manner of death and the cause of death, both undetermined. Updates as they come in on this developing story on WFLA.com, the WFLA app.